This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grawn, your wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the trooping and solitary, and ghosts who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore or mythology, we retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olahan. I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 135 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we have the story of Manawydan in the aftermath of Wales's war with Ireland and his adventures with Pryderi, Rhiannon and Cigfa. But first, if you are brand new to the podcast and this is your first episode, why don't you at least start with the episode on Pulk, Prince of Dyfed, because we're about 5 episodes into our exploration of Welsh mythology as we explore the Mabinogion, and that might be a better footing. And then if you enjoy that, why don't you head right back to the very, very beginning and see what we've been building up to over the last 2.5 years and 135 episodes. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for your continued support. If you haven't done so already, please do follow me over on Instagram. It's the best place to get in touch with me and to check out what other stuff I'm up to. If you're not on social media, please follow me or email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. And if you really want to support the podcast, you can do so over at Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com, where for as little as €5 a month, or though you can pay more if you want, you can gain access to bonus material and bonus episodes, not just for Fireside, but for all of the podcasts on the Headstuff Podcast Network. And this month's latest episode is an episode on the mythology of the poetry of W.B. Yeats, and we've got a brand new bonus episode coming out next week, which is my interview that I did before Christmas. It's been very much anticipated, with Mark Williams, the author of Ireland's Immortals, one of the most influential books I've read on Irish mythology, one of the best contemporary guides to this wonderful world that we all love so much. I want to give a big warm welcome to the latest subscriber over on Headstuff Plus, which is Timothy Stevens. Timothy joins William Moore, Beth Phillips, Ruth Phillips, Beth Kettler, Tracy Rowlands, Elizabeth Bongine, Stuart McCabe, Ray McGahan, Rebecca Garvey, Martina Rafferty and Matthew Hill as the latest of the subscribers and the joiners of the intimate community of Fireside. And all of you are very much appreciated. As those who have been listening to recent episodes know, I was on a 6-month tour of Australia and New Zealand with musical theatre show World of Musicals that was unfortunately cut short due to recent outbreaks in South Australia, and border restrictions has been rescheduled to next year. So I'm back in Ireland. This is the first episode I've recorded in Ireland in a good few months now. It's good to be back in my home studio now, but I'm back, and your support for the podcast, your listenership, and what support you all have been giving is never been more appreciated. So thank you so much to each and every one of you who do. The story for this week, we are moving on to the third of the 4 branches of the Mabinogion of Welsh mythology. So far, we have had to split all of the branches into separate twigs, separate limbs. The first branch we split into 3 episodes with the stories of Pulk, Prince of Dyfed, Rhiannon and Pryderi. The second branch we split into 2, which was the story of the blow to Branwen and followed by Wales's war with Ireland. And the third branch connects the first 2 branches in a way that they weren't connected to each other as tangibly. There was some slight crossovers, mostly just the mention of Pryderi and the cameo of Pryderi towards the end of Wales's war with Ireland. But the third branch, as you will very soon see, forges the two, and we start to see the tree that the branches of the Mabinogi are coming from. And this is the story of Manawydan. I apologize. I'm still getting my head around some of the pronunciations of these wonderful Welsh heroes. So this episode I was able to fit into one story. So this one didn't need to be split. We'll make it a bit longer, and hopefully I haven't had to condense it quite as much. But it's a great story. I really enjoyed adapting this one. Hope you all enjoy it. We'll chat a bit more afterwards. This is the story of Manawydan on Fireside. Manawydan. In the aftermath of the war between Wales and Ireland, Manawydan sat on an English hill facing France. He was heartbroken, dejected, and totally unsure of his next move. Manawydan had buried the head of his brother Bendigeid Vran, the King of Wales, in London, facing France to ward off future invasion from the east. His cousin, Caswallon, had seized control of both England and the island of the mighty. But as for Manawydan himself, he was a nobleman for sure, but stood to inherit no lands and in essence now had nowhere to go. The last companion he had was Pryderi, son of Pulch Penanefin, who following the death of his father was now lord over the 7 cantrefs of Dyfed. "Lord," said Pryderi, "come home with me to Dyfed. It is a smaller kingdom than you are used to, but I promise you there are no finer 7 cantrefs in the entire island of the mighty." So the 2 war-torn heroes went to Arbeth, where they were greeted by a mighty feast. There was Cigfa, Pryderi's wife, and his mother, Rhiannon, even in her later years still one of the most beautiful and revered ladies in all of Britain. Pryderi, Cigfa, Manawydan and Rhiannon ate, drank and chatted well into the night. They talked of Pulch, of how he had claimed Rhiannon's hand in marriage by tricking a lord to step into a sack which he then tied and beat, beginning the game Badger in the Bag. They talked of Bendigeid Vran, the king so large he had never been able to fit inside any fort or house. By the end of the night, the 4 were as thick as thieves, and more. Rhiannon and Manawydan felt they were falling in love with one another. No one could ever replace Pulch in Rhiannon's eyes. But Pulch was gone, and Manawydan was a fine and noble man. And because things move fast in myths and fairy tales, the next day Manawydan and Rhiannon were married. The 4 companions lived a fine life of hunting during the day and feasting at night. Things were going all too well. That was until one evening, while the 4 sat in the great hall of Arbeth, they heard a great noise unlike anything they had heard before, like great metal dragged across granite rock. Following the noise, a mist descended over the hall, and when the noise faded and the mist cleared, Pryderi, Cigfa, Rhiannon and Manawydan found they were alone in the hall. They went to the bedchambers, the kitchens. No one. They went outside. There were no guards or courtiers. No one. They went to the stables. There were no horses. To the fields, no sheep or cattle. The 4 companions were the only living creatures left in Dyfed. After searching through all 7 cantrefs for any sign of life, Pryderi concluded that they could not live this way. With no game to hunt, they would soon starve to death. So Pryderi and Manawydan made the decision to go to England to work a trade. They would bring back meal and game to their beloved wives. Rhiannon and Cigfa would remain in Dyfed and send word to England should the mysterious curse be lifted. First, the 2 boys went to Hereford. "What trade shall we work at?" asked Pryderi. "Let us be saddlers," said Manawydan. And so the 2 became saddle makers. Manawydan would shape and enamel the leather, and Pryderi would stitch and detail and fasten the stirrup. Neither had crafted saddles before, but they both knew horses and riding and what made a good saddle, and soon they found they were the most popular saddle makers in Hereford. In fact, no one went for a saddle to anyone else. And soon the other Hereford saddlers began to plot to kill Manawydan and Pryderi. "It seems we've made an enemy of the saddlers," said Manawydan. "We shouldn't take that. We could easily take them all," said Pryderi. "True, but it would be wrong for us to come into a town, run hard-working people out of their trade, and then kill them all for it. Let's just move town." So the two budding tradesmen left Hereford and went to another town. "What shall we be here?" asked Pryderi. "Your choice," said Manawydan. "Let's make shields. We both know armour, but let's establish ourselves as valuing defence over weaponry." So Pryderi and Manawydan became shield makers. Manawydan cutting, smelting and shaping the metal, and Pryderi gilding and finishing the detail. They made large, durable, but light and movable shields. Unfortunately, better than anyone else. And soon the blacksmiths began to plot against them. "Now the blacksmiths want to kill us," said Manawydan. "Let's kill them first," said Pryderi. "No, we can't make a name for ourselves as blacksmith killers. Let's just move town again, and the next time we won't make anything to do with war or battle." So they settled in a third town, and Manawydan decided they would be cobblers. "Let us make shoes. Simple, non-offensive, non-aggressive shoes." "I can't make shoes," said Pryderi. "I can. I will teach you." They used only the finest Cordovan leather, and Manawydan made the shoe and Pryderi stitched and laced them. And once again they were the greatest craftsmen in town, and so, inevitably, bore the anger and wrath of every cobbler. "This is getting ridiculous," said Pryderi. "Agreed," said Manawydan. "But we have made a substantial amount of money now. Let us buy grain and wheat and crops to plant and hounds to hunt with, and let us return home to Dyfed, to our wives." So Manawydan bought the harvest and Pryderi bought the hounds, and they set out to return to Wales. When they were once again entering the cantrefs of Dyfed, they were disappointed to see that it remained barren and desolate, without a sign of life. That was until the dogs began to bark and give chase. The two heroes followed where the dogs pursued to see a magnificent white boar. "Imagine if we returned home with that boar for Cigfa and Rhiannon to feast upon," cried Pryderi. And so the hunt began. The hounds and heroes pursued the boar across hills and deep into valleys until they came to a massive stone fort. Pryderi knew the 7 cantrefs of Dyfed better than his own mother's face, and no fort had ever existed here before. The white boar ran across the threshold and into the fort. The hounds gave chase, but once they were inside, no sound of dog nor boar was heard again. Manawydan said, "If you are right and no fort has existed here before, then we should proceed with great caution." But Pryderi's impetuousness got the better of him. It was a spirit he had inherited from his father. "I will not abandon my hounds, and we will feast upon that boar." And Pryderi rode off into the great mysterious fort. Inside, the Lord of Dyfed saw no dog or pig, but a great stone well. Beside the well was a beautiful, jewel-encrusted bowl, with chains coming off it leading high into the sky. Pryderi looked up, but could not see where the chains ended. It was as if this was the well and drinking bowl of the heavens. Pryderi placed his hands on the golden bowl, and could not take them off again. The hands were stuck to the bowl. Not only that, his feet fastened to the ground, and worst of all, he found he could not speak. Pryderi was helpless and could not even cry for help. Outside the fort, Manawydan waited in vain for Pryderi. He wanted to follow him into the fort, but if he did, and he too disappeared, then there would be no one to defend Rhiannon and Cigfa. So, with a heavy heart, Manawydan returned to Arbeth. Once there, Rhiannon chided her husband for abandoning her son. "Some companion you are, after all that my son has given you, and you abandon him. You think we women are so helpless to need the defence of a coward?" Rhiannon, as always, could cut down anyone with her words. That night Rhiannon rode from Arbeth until she found the mysterious fort. Foolhardy, she rode into the fort and found her son, still fastened tight to the golden bowl. Unfortunately, without access to his voice, hands or feet, Pryderi could not even gesture to warn his mother not to. And Rhiannon touched the golden bowl, and her hands stuck to it, and her feet fastened to the ground, and she lost the use of her tongue. Mother and son were helpless and trapped. And then they heard the foreboding, familiar sound that they had heard that night in Arbeth, and suddenly a mist descended upon them. But this time they were not left behind. When the mist lifted, Rhiannon and Pryderi were gone. Back at Arbeth, Cigfa wept when neither her mother-in-law nor her husband came home. Manawydan said, "Lady, do not fear. You will never have a greater friend and protector than you will in me. I have brought crops to plant. I will sow them this day, and we will survive." Manawydan had brought enough grain, wheat and barley back from England to fill 3 fields. He finished planting them, and the next morning went to reap what he had sown. But he found the entire first field had been ravaged. There was still no other sign of life in Dyfed. It did not seem possible. Manawydan began to pick what he could of the second field, but was shaken and distracted by the loss of the first. The next morning, the second field had been desecrated. So that night, Manawydan hid in wait, guarding the third field. Before sunrise, Manawydan saw a mischief of mice scurry across the field and begin to eat away at the crops. Raising a scythe high above his head, Manawydan began to chase the vermin away. He was determined to catch as many as he could, but the mice were too fast. There was only one particular fat little mouse that Manawydan was able to catch, and he placed it in a little pouch and carried it back to Arbeth. "What have you got there?" asked Cigfa when Manawydan returned. "It is a fat mouse that was ravaging our crops, and I'm going to hang it." "It is far beneath a nobleman of your rank to hang such a pathetic creature," said Cigfa. But Manawydan wouldn't hear any of it. He was going to channel all of his rage and misery and frustration and loss out on this fat little mouse. They went outside to construct a tiny gallows. But suddenly they were approached by the first human either of them had seen other than Pryderi and Rhiannon in what they both realized had been 7 long years. The figure was a cleric, and he asked, "What is it that you are doing there?" "We are hanging a mouse," replied Manawydan. "How is it that you are here?" "I have been in England for 7 years, and am happy to see someone still here in Dyfed. But if I may ask, please do not hang that mouse. I will give you £1 for it." "Keep your money," said Manawydan. "This mouse must die." Next the two were approached by a priest. This priest offered £3, and again Manawydan said he would not be so easily bought. Finally came a bishop, who offered 7, then 20, then £37, and each time Manawydan refused. "Well then, name your price," said the bishop. "I'll give you anything." "I wish for the safe return of Pryderi and my wife Rhiannon," said Manawydan. "Done," said the bishop. "Now hand over the mouse." "Not yet." "Who are you?" "I am the one who cursed this land. I came here to avenge Gwawl, son of Clud, who sought the hand of Rhiannon in marriage. Pulch, Prince of Dyfed, deceived him and trapped him in a sack and beat him senseless. They called the game Badger in the Bag. I came to take revenge on all of Dyfed. But the mouse that you have in your possession is my wife. I turned my own men into mice to ravage your fields. But my wife is pregnant and was hungry and asked me to turn her into a mouse too so that she may feast. I didn't want to, but she insisted. Now hand her over." "Not yet," said Manawydan. "What else do you want?" "I want this entire curse over Dyfed to be lifted, and all to be returned as it was. And I want it sworn that neither you nor anyone else shall ever be able to curse this land again." "Done and done," said the bishop. And a moment later, Rhiannon and Pryderi appeared from nowhere, and Pryderi embraced Cigfa, and Manawydan embraced Rhiannon. True to his word, Manawydan handed over the mouse, and the bishop transformed her back into human form. The curse was lifted, and a new enchantment placed over Dyfed that no further harm could come to its 7 cantrefs. And Manawydan, for the first time in many, many years, was at peace and could rest. To be continued. Folks, as you all know, Fireside is a proud son of the Headstuff Podcast Network, which is Ireland's largest network of independent podcasts and a loving home for the creative and indeed the curious. There are so many other podcasts I could recommend to you on the network, some of which inspired me to approach Headstuff myself. Here's a taste of one you might enjoy.
Okay, it's Jibs here from Pints of Malt. So our podcast is basically group of Irish Nigerian lads who tell their stories, growing up in Ireland as well as Nigeria, and we share our experiences with all of y'all. We also add a bit of comedy as well, to get y'all laughing, get y'all through the week in these tough times that we are in. So y'all sit back and just, enjoy the show.
As Jib said, we're the Pints of Malt podcast. You can find us on all streaming platforms, including the Headstuff Network.
And that was the story of Manawydan on Fireside, and so begins and so ends the 3rd branch of the Mabinogion, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, you see very immediately, those who have been listening to all of the Welsh myths of recent weeks, that this is the true forging of the first 2 tales. Because in the first branch we have all the stories of Pulch, Prince of Dyfed, and his wife Rhiannon and his son Pryderi. But then in the second story we meet Manawydan, who's more of a background figure when it's his brother Bendigeid Vran, who's more of our protagonist, and we had Efnisien as our antagonist and Branwen as the cause of all of this plight and who they were going to be rescuing, and we had Matholwch, the king of Ireland. But Manawydan was just there in the background, and then we just had a cameo appearance from Pryderi towards the end. But other than that, very little connecting the two. No mention of Dyfed, otherwise it's more of a national tale, the second branch, whereas Dyfed is more of the smaller kingdom, these smaller cantrefs, 7 cantrefs. But then we get to the 3rd branch, and the two just clash heads. This is the mashup of the first 2 branches, where we meet Pryderi and Rhiannon once again. And it's great because I love it. It's great to see Rhiannon appear again, and in a very similar characteristic, because my favourite detail of Rhiannon in her own story was how she chides Pulch for his stupidity when Gwawl approaches and asks for a favour of Pulk, and Pulk says he'll give him anything, and of course the Gwawl then says, okay, then give me the hand in marriage of your prospective wife. And Rhiannon goes through Pulk over this and then has to make up this plan to get so that she can marry Pulk, the love of her life, after all, no thanks to him. And we have that same character here when Manawydan returns home without Pryderi. We have him being chided by Rhiannon for returning without him and suggesting that they would not need the defense of this coward. And I really like that, considering a lot of these myths, these 4 branches are loosely connected to each other and may have come from various different sources and may have been put together at a later date. It's really nice to see that kind of similar characteristic in what can be quite vague characters that just kind of you get out of what you put into them, you know. I always love seeing that in a running characteristic. It makes me think that these were the same stories, you know, by the same people, and that they had these behaviors that people knew. But other than that, it takes this story is very much like a folktale in many ways. The lines are constantly blurred, you know, between myths and folktales. To my mind, is always like my definition as for what it counts as. I usually consider myths to be stories about gods or kings or heroes, and folktales are more stories about people, more of stories about you and me. Often stories then about animals or characters that might not even have names. They're more defined by their title. And this is obviously a story about nobles and kings and heroes, but yet most of the story beats in it are very folktale-esque. First and foremost, Pryderi and Manawydan going off on their merry travels and working a trade in various towns in Britain and being ran out of each town by the local tradesmen. That's a really like self-contained folktale in itself, and I love the details of it. The beginning of each one, it's like, what will be today? Will be this. Okay, let's do that. And they're ran out of town. It's almost like a folk song itself, and there's the real poetry and the rhythm to that. And then we have them going back. Of course, we skipped over this mist, this curse that descends over Dyfed, which is then just like a horror movie, you know, like The Mist or A Quiet Place, or suddenly just there's this zombie apocalypse, this post-apocalyptic wasteland that all other life, not just human beings, any animal life, is just wiped out, is just gone, except for our 4 protagonists, except for Manawydan, Pryderi, Cigfa and Rhiannon. And when they return and they find this great fort and they chase this boar, we have this bizarre and this really mysterious aspect. You know, constantly in myth, you're faced with details that are never mentioned again, and you try not to justify them if they don't justify themselves, and leave it to the listener's imagination, leave it to my own imagination. I try not to explain away things too much. But we have this mysterious fort that's very specifically said there's a fort where no fort existed before, and this is where the boar leads the hounds in. And Pryderi goes in, and there is this well and this golden bowl with chains leading up into the sky, like this bowl from heaven just leading down. And this bowl is he sticks to it, and then is swept away. So of course it's up to us to conclude at the end that this was the bowl of this bishop who, and it was just all a part of this elaborate curse. But it's such an interesting detail, unlike anything I'd encountered before. And it was worth noting and worth really paying attention to, of why there's this incredibly specific detail of this bowl. Why are the chains leading up to the sky? Probably would have been less confusing if I left that out entirely, but I couldn't not add that as an incredible detail. And the same fate befalls Rhiannon, but it's great that she gets this because she's quite passive in the story otherwise, which is a shame considering how active she is in her own story from a few weeks ago. So it's great that she does have this moment where she pursues her son, tries to rescue her son where her husband wouldn't. Because in the actual versions of these stories, Pryderi and Manawydan are just returned from Ireland, and Pryderi basically says to Manawydan, I'll give you my mother. And I know that that's just probably how things would have worked at the time. I didn't think it was necessary. I liked the idea of him inviting him to the kingdom and them naturally falling in love. That was just a detail I changed that I stand by very much. But other than that, she doesn't get this agency until she goes and pursues her son. And poor old Cigfa doesn't really get any agency at all, except just to be sad that Pryderi and Rhiannon are gone. But then we get this nicer side to Manawydan's character, because he's been so cunning the whole time, but then we get this paternal, just protective. And he has this big speech that I condensed where he just talks about what a good friend he will be turned for her not to be afraid of him. And it is very paternal and seems very genuine. And it's one of my favorite details of his character in the story. And then at the very end, it almost becomes a Disney movie, or a really messed up Disney movie, because we have these mice that come and ravage the fields, and Manawydan catches one and wants to hang it. He wants to hang a little fat mouse, and it's very hard to not picture just the mice from Cinderella, to picture Gus Gus, this chubby little mouse, who he's then going to hang. So obviously he must construct this little gallows, and then again this real folktale beat of these three characters offering three things: the cleric, and then the priest, and then the bishop. At what point does Manawydan know what's going on? Did he know the whole time? Or was he just going, the only thing you could possibly offer me is the return of Pryderi and Rhiannon? And as it just so happened, he was talking to the exact right guy for that. But this is the wonderful world of mythology as well. They are at one point deadly serious, and another point totally comical and totally farcical, and they never apologize for that. That isn't doable in most forms of media or literature anymore. Something has to be one thing or the other. If something is going to be silly, it can't suddenly be very serious. If something is very serious, it can't suddenly have this total cartoonish absurdity. Myth doesn't care about that. And that is one of the things that endears it to me most of all. You can have this very genuine, heroic folk tale of two lads going off, working a trade, trying to cure a curse, and it can end in this farcical episode of trying to hang a mouse who's actually a pregnant woman. Yes, this is, as you can probably tell, this is my favourite of the stories of Welsh mythology so far. I like that I was able to make it into the one tale. I think it would have interrupted it too much otherwise. I would have had to cut it off around where Rhiannon gets, and it wouldn't have been contained in itself. When I split them up, I like them to still be their own stories themselves, that you could listen to them in isolation. But it would have made the second part too short and everything. And I don't feel it was rushed. I feel I got all the beats and the details in there. And it feels like my version of this story. And I hope you all enjoyed it. And with that, I will wrap things up. But thank you so much for listening. Please follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Support over at HeadStuffPlus at HeadStuffPodcast.com. There is a link in the description. That is a thing I've usually always been bad about in the biog for this. That'll be there. There'll be the links to the Instagram and to HeadStuffPlus, because I know some people have been trying to and haven't been able to access it for some reason. But it should be very easily accessible at HeadStuffPodcast.com. But click on that link in the bio. And next week we will have the fourth and final branch of the Mabinogion. That's not the end of Welsh mythology, but it will be the beginning of the last of the stories that are connected to each other as strongly or stronger than any of the subsequent about 6 or 7 tales. We may take, as I've been saying, like, it's still up in the air a little bit. We may take a break from Welsh mythology afterwards to get back to our roots, maybe have a couple of Irish folk tales. Let me know what you all like. I know some people have been saying they want another folk tale in there. I'll lash one in. Now that I'm back at home, I have access to all of my books again. I can get digging again. But I'm really enjoying it, and I've been really enjoying the feedback from you all. So that'll be next week. I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Headstuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.